Marketplaces and their fees are not a real business. It does not work. Marketplaces being built on some server, people interacting, do not work. It's going to collapse. It's all coming to an end. Let's think about it in the way of war. When civilizations are established, prior to that, there's a war fought. People fight wars. The victor writes history. He establishes his civilization, and he collects the taxes. He has authority in the infrastructure and resources. He governs the resources of that geographic location. Startups have done this. From the internet boom, marketplaces arose. Facebook marketplace, which is a bad example. It's like it's the newest one. But you had Airbnb, you have Uber, Lyft, Amazon. What's their business model? They won the war too. There was a war. Facebook had to go to war to win against MySpace and so on. Uber had to go to war and won against Postmates and so on. Amazon had to go to war with other marketplaces and so on. There was a deployment of resources. There was an army behind them, their employees. There was a strategist, which CEO, he was the general. And they won the war. And they have to constantly maintain their position and they're collecting fees, which could be taxes, deemed as taxes. And they get to write the rules on the marketplace. They get to control the platform. Is it a bad thing? I'm not here to speak about what's virtue and what's not virtue. But let's think about what's happening and what's going to happen. So after the civilization is established, they collect the fees, rules arise. So what happens? What happens, I think, is the same thing that happens in history. A rebellion arises. There's always been a rebellion, famously, in the United States when taxes was the huge thing. That's why Americans win a war. They didn't want to pay taxes. Taxes, innately, they're not virtuous, to be honest. It just never lasts. It's not a sustaining thing. Men feel like they're being robbed. It comes down to that. So that's what's happening with Amazon. So how do you maintain a marketplace? Because once a civilization is established, you have to maintain it. And to maintain it takes resources. And that's fees. That's a good argument. Well, let's think about the civilization. What's mainly established in a civilization? You have the judicial, you have the legislative, and you have the judicial and executive. So it's in a similar way, one entity is just establishing all these bodies of governance when they build a marketplace. And what do these legislative bodies do? They're public entities, and they collect fees, and they fund the richer taxes, and they fund their entire processes through these taxes, right? And that's how civilizations go on and eventually collapse. So marketplaces will collapse just like civilizations do, but it's gonna happen faster, I would hope. Personally, I would hope it will happen faster than civilizations do, because it's a business entity and so on, and disruptions happen more often and so on. And what's gonna come will be distributed. Administration still needs to be there, but distributed marketplaces have to arise, where the resources are native to the infrastructure of the players. What do you mean by that? Chitindi? Or city? Whatever you want to call me. Well, I mean a computer, the infrastructure will be running locally on your phone. So instead of it running on the server, your phone's going to act like the server. Your computer is going to act like the server to perform critical tasks required on the platform. So marketplaces are inevitably just administrative companies. Wars are fought, resources placed by generals through raising venture capital. One side is established. They're military men. In translation, employees build the They build the platform, and when they win, they jack up the fees and all these things. And by real business, I mean a company that produces a product or a service. Middlemen have always been despised by those that produce. Always. It's not going to change. So, a middleman is a lazy man that's trying to gain a profit from the efforts of other men. That's how I define it. And when you're thinking extremely long term, the middleman is constantly recreating themselves, because the market wants to transact directly. We want to transact directly, but the middleman will always find a way. So it's a struggle that we have to fight. That's just philosophy that goes beyond this. So administrative companies are not real companies. You can easily see what's happened with Uber and so on. Those companies are vastly unprofitable. How are you going to generate so much revenue? Clearly, because the demand is there, but your positioning in the transaction is not profitable for you. You're just collecting a bunch of fees, jacking up the prices for everybody. But you have to find a way to sustain, right? Which is understandable. But you can't provide all the services on the platform, because that's capital intensive. If you're providing all the cars and hiring all the people, that gets real intense as far as capital. So now you start to think deeply. These ideas, and these are little things that you see in society, that when you start to dissect deeply, it starts to go to the core of the root causes and problems that we face in society. Just analyzing a structure like that, like a Uber, and the results and the outcomes that came from that. So, without losing too much topic, what's the solution? Like I said, money is time, energy, knowledge from other people or entities and so on. Once marketplaces start to capture that directly, deploy the resources, especially the compute resources, towards everybody has an iPhone, everybody has a computer nowadays, so you start deploying those resources locally to these people, meaning their energy, their time. You're capturing all these things. What's left? What's left as far as fees and processing? Some processes need to be implemented by third parties, but these third parties would be playing an active direct role towards the transaction happening, right? So when that starts to happen, there's obviously going to be some form of compensation structure, because they're not a middle player, but they're playing a critical role into the transaction being successful, maybe an integral role. It's an integrity thing at that juncture. So those are the people that will be compensated in a structure depending on how the marketplace wants to organize itself, and then the players will interact directly in a trusted manner without trusting each other. That's the future. So in that manner, when the marketplace is organized in a manner that the players are using their own infrastructure and their own compute to organize their commerce, you don't need a middleman at that juncture. There still could be a middleman, but they're going to be coming in an angle where they're facilitating the commerce to happen in a very involving way, not in a passive way and just collect the fee because we built the code or we built the platform, so we're just going to collect a tax. That's very unproductive in the long term for civilization, and it's shown. Why is your company not profitable? Because these things don't work, and it's mind blowing to see a company unprofitable like Uber when they don't even run any infrastructure as far as physical infrastructure for cars and so on. I don't think Uber has their own servers. I might be wrong. They might be using a sourcing service from Amazon and so on. So then most of your employees are just developers and so on. You can outsource that to India too, but you start to wonder why. If all you're doing is marketing, really, can any other entrepreneur do the marketing? Isn't that the person that could collect the fees? It gets distributed at that point. You start having mom and pop shops for marketing rideshare rides. That's what it starts to look like. So now it gets even deeper. I'll touch on this, where philosophy comes in, where marketplaces start to determine and become the virtue of injustices. something happens on the ride, on Uber, and so on, they become the moral voice of what needs to happen on how to conduct justice, on who gets a refund, and so on. And that's the fundamental problem that society deals with today. So, are you trusting these computer guys? You're putting all this power in their hands to now start deciding what's moral and what's justice when two different individuals are doing commerce. That's where a distributed marketplace needs a layer for justice, a justice system layer. And that's where those third parties come in to maintain integrity and so on, where you stake resources. The entire global distributed internet agrees on the rules. When something is violated, or maybe let's say on a ride share, a ride was booked, they say, oh, it never happened, everything's on chain, somebody just comes here, verifies looks, he acts as the justice virtue and so on, because they've put their resources at stake to make sure the honest, proven truth that we've all agreed upon is followed based on some contract rules and so on. And they act on that. And if they make an error too, it could be appealed. Just like we have in the justice system, but this is happening faster with smart contracts, with proofs on chain. What does that do to a middleman? Get the fuck out of here. Go build a real company. So now we have a new spacecraft because he deployed his time and energy towards something that's not here. If he really wanted to get that rich, he's gonna do something more productive and not just build a little marketplace and collect shares. Maybe I have an animosity towards marketplaces because I have been on a lot. I've been on tour. I had a 7-figure business there. I've done transportation in the trucking avenue when I was learning about transportation. And I've experienced on each platform, Uber, DoorDash, Turo, Instacart. I've tried a lot of that stuff. I've experienced situations where I feel treated unfairly. Sometimes people can't even get on because of a discrimination. But hey, who are you to? But it's quality control for them. They're mitigating risk because it's their company. It's centralized. But what if somebody is willing to charge way less because they just have maybe a few accidents? The person booking the ride could understand the risks. That's a high risk ride, but it's charging way less than a quality ride could. So that day they might just have $1, and the guy might be willing to drive him for $1, but it's high risk. So who's to say that transaction can't happen?